Let's start off with our favorite topic here on Winnipeg Sports Talk, the Winnipeg Jets head coaching search, Trotz Watch. Some interesting reports coming out over the course of the weekend. The People's Insider, Kevin Weekes, saying it sounds like it's Trotz and John Tortorella in Philly, and the Winnipeg and Philly jobs might be linked. And then Elliotte Friedman earlier today saying he does think that there could be some sort of movement or clarity later on this week. What's coming across your desk right now when it comes to Trotz Watch and the Jets coaching search?
Yeah, well, not to piggyback, but to piggyback, kind of the same thing. I mean, we said last week. I mean, the reality is it's not, you can look at this deadline this week, whether it's midweek, late week. I'm hearing as early as tomorrow or Wednesday. Again, that's Elliotte Friedman's report, but it goes with what we said last week. I mean, it has to happen sooner than later. And if it's not Barry Trotz making his decision, it's the teams having to make their decision, right? I mean, we know that the Winnipeg Jets have Barry Trotz at the top of their list. I can say that there's a bit of dialogue within the organization about Barry Trotz. I know there's a bit of a growing narrative here that Trotz maybe isn't what every team wants or needs, or that a player has. And I don't know if this is a building narrative for the teams that don't get Barry Trotz, that they can kind of justify, their loss. Obviously for Winnipeg, it will hurt. He's at the top of their list. If you were to take, NFL fantasy picks and create positions into tiers, if you took the tiers of coaching, particularly when it comes to Winnipeg, you'd have Barry Trotz in the number one tier, and then the rest would be in the, the various tiers below. So they want him. That he would create all those or answers to a lot of the questions and some of the issues that this team has, including this team needs to win this hire. So a Barry Trotz would be a massive win. It would rejuvenate the fan base and all that stuff. I find the Philadelphia report interesting. I guess they would be linked, right? Because if Tortorella gets it, then Trotz doesn't, and vice versa. So and I think Philly's an interesting one here, because I had heard early on in the negotiations that Philly wasn't really at the top of Trotz list. They're obviously a bit of a mess there. They don't believe they're in a big as mess as their record would suggest with how they're spending money, and they did go through a lot of injuries and stuff like that. But I could totally see Philadelphia upping their offer. I could see them being like, we need to turn this around. We have a rabid fan base. We all know how crazy Philadelphia fans are. So you either bring in a guy like John Tortorella, or you really do appease a guy like Barry Trotz, and maybe you give him some opportunity to grow in management. We all know that's what Barry Trotz wants, not necessarily right now, but eventually. And, as I talked about before, the Jets felt that they were in a position where they could offer him, quote unquote, a long-term solution, whereas all these other teams, some of which are certainly more high profile than the Winnipeg Jets, want him now to fix their issues today. And no one wants, and I also think it has to do with the organization, right? I mean, not a lot of teams, GMs will want to be hiring their replacement in Barry Trotz. And maybe they don't have that corporate ladder climb like a guy like Kevin Cheveldayoff may have with Winnipeg, right? If you can bring Barry Trotz into a management role, assuming the Jets are still doing well under his tutelage as a head coach, then you could probably make the excuse to move Kevin Cheveldayoff into a higher role. Obviously, that would be harder to do if the Jets weren't as good. Anyways, a little bit off topic here, but the reality is Barry Trotz needs to make his decision sooner than later, and he's had enough time to mull over his options. I don't think there's going to be many more teams here that are firing their head coaches and offering him a spot. I don't see the two Stanley, the four finalists here necessarily moving on from their coaches. So I think if you're Barry Trotz, you kind of need to make a decision. Again, people will say he needs, he can take his time, and he certainly has had time. But whether you're the Winnipeg Jets, whether you're the Vegas Golden Knights, whether you're the Detroit Red Wings, or whether you're the Philadelphia Flyers, all teams that have been reported to have interest in Barry Trotz, you need to figure it out now. Where it becomes interesting with the Jets, and we talked about this last week, Huss, is that they have a mess. You know what I mean? Like, they have a mess beginning in the locker room, to their, to personnel, to their structure. To not have, they need to make that move sooner than later, so then they can start answering all the other questions. And that's nothing to say of the draft that's coming up next month. So As far as I'm told, I mean, if I could add anything, I know there's pressure from inside True North to move on from Barry Trotz if they don't get an answer sooner than later. But I have a hard time thinking the guy at the top is thinking anything different so long as Barry Trotz hasn't put pen to paper anywhere else.
Well, and this may be a waste of time for a question because I'm pretty sure we may have helped close the deal on Friday with the offer of free beer for life from Little Brown Jug and Barry Trotz's own beer if he does decide to come here to Winnipeg. But if it does, but if that is not the case, where do you think the Jets turn? I mean, we've talked about a lot of different names. We've heard a number of different names being linked to Winnipeg. If Barry Trotz is out of the mix, and I certainly hope that's not the case, where do you think they start from Barry? Like, where does that second tier, to use your fantasy analogy, start?
Well, we know they've talked to Rick Tocchet. We know they're interested in a guy like Scott Arniel. Would either of those guys, quote unquote, would that be a win for this team? Possibly. I think a lot of fans would enjoy a Rick Tocchet on the bench, or I don't think Claude Julien's in the mix here. I know he had an opportunity with, coaching Pierre-Luc Dubois and Adam Lowry in the World Championship, but I just don't think Winnipeg's, his ideal destination. Kirk Muller, I'm being told, who I know the Jets were, at least interested in to help out with their center situation. I'm hearing he's now being pressed by Calgary and might be the coach in waiting under Daryl Sutter for what he's done. I mean, they're acknowledging that he's done a lot of special things. I don't think that Kirk Muller has any hurt feelings from not getting the job with Winnipeg, years ago, but he's just a guy that I think, certainly a guy that I had at the top of my list is someone who could help out this team, something a lot of scouts around the league really love, those people who are in the know. I don't think Derek Lalonde is going to be a guy that the Jets, are going to be able to go after. I honestly think it's almost kind of feeling like Trotz or bust. Sorry, I shouldn't classify it as Trotz or bust. I can see this team going to some of the usual suspects. I can see this team, if they don't get a Barry Trotz, I could completely see True North hiring like a Pascal Vincent and then having more say than they would over a Barry Trotz or maybe a higher profile name on deciding who the assistant coaches are. So I think that's might be True North's silver lining in not getting Barry Trotz is, hiring a guy who they know and they respect in Pascal Vincent or someone of the like, and then having kind of the pieces around him filling it out in the way that they see fit. But I mean, again, I think Barry Trotz is the guy that they're going after. I think they're the ones holding their breath. But
what about Montgomery? What about Montgomery? I found it interesting.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, he's a guy that certainly has, coached in the National Hockey League, and actually he was doing quite a good job before off-ice things sort of took him away. I mean, I don't know how much to make out of spending 1 year here with the Moose in the late 90s, but certainly, at least it would open the doors. You'd have that relationship. I mean, do you think that he would be another guy that would be in that mix, in that tier just below Barry?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can't believe I forgot his name. It's an interesting hire. I do think that, some of the off-ice stuff is, I think we can move on from that. I don't think it's certainly not a situation like a Joel Quenneville or some other coaches that, in the past have had a bit more of a, Mike Babcock, some of the more higher profile, crap that we've seen from coaches over the past. But yeah, definitely a possibility. I'm with you. I do think there's a connection there. I certainly think there's an appreciation for Manitoba. Like, a lot of people go, well, why can't True North find anybody else outside of their inner circle or anyone who has connections? Well, I don't know if it's so much them wanting to zero in on people that they necessarily have connections to as much as or as equally to it being them kind of knowing what Winnipeg has to offer, what the province has to offer, whether you've been here for a year or grew up here or whatever it is. You kind of know. And I think True North has a good reputation amongst those people. I mean, they treat their players right. They treat their coaches right. So I wouldn't be, it's not surprising at all that someone who's come through Winnipeg would be interested in making a return. The other thing with Jim Montgomery too is, yeah, I mean, he played for the Moose for that one season, but he's a guy that the Jets have leaned on, for scouting opportunities, right? I mean, he was a big NCAA guy. So there's a lot of connections there. And I think, he's somebody that, might be might be a very positive addition. I don't know much about Jim Montgomery's style per se, but he obviously was able to do some good things with Dallas before things went off the rails. And he would be a coach, I think, that, would be a qualified coach, certainly, and would probably fit those boxes that we talked about, needing some respect from the players right away. I think he gets that, or at least I think he checks that box, but we'll see.